law school buddies, sharing my civil procedure specifically about personal jurisdiction outlined with you now. So first we're going to make sure that the claim was filed in the proper court. You're going to look at personal jurisdiction. Does the court have personal jurisdiction over the defendant? Personal jurisdiction, that refers to the power that the court has to adjudicate the over like the claims that are involving the particular parties. A court has personal jurisdiction if the forum's own law grants personal jurisdiction and if that forum's law is constitutional under the due process clause. So again, we're looking to make sure that the forum state grants personal jurisdiction and if that is constitutional. So first you're going to look and see if the claim was filed in federal court or state court. So if it was filed in federal court, generally federal court will just look to what the forum state's jurisdictional provision says, and they'll just go with what that state says, unless there is a federal statute that is specific to that claim and it has a specific wording in there that states how personal jurisdiction is established. And if that is the case, then you're going to look and see that the plaintiff followed what that statute says. Also, you'd look at the 100-mile bulge rule, which is you're looking to see if there was somebody joined or if there was an essential party that was added to it, or if there was a federal claim. So if there are none of those and it's filed in the federal court, then you would still be looking at what the state court's jurisdictional provision states, right? Because the federal court will then just relay to what the state court provision says. Or if it was filed in the state court, then you are also going to be looking at what the state court's provision says about personal jurisdiction. So a state court usually has a long-arm statute. If it has a long-arm statute, typically it will extend to the constitutional limit. If there is not a state court a long-arm statute, then you would just assume that that state would extend to the constitutional limit. So if there's a long-arm statute, then you do also want to look at it and see that that has also been filed. Just like in federal court, you would look to make sure that the statute was followed. Next, we're looking at the constitutional aspect of personal jurisdiction, right? Does asserting personal jurisdiction over that matter, does it require the requirements under the due process clause? First, you would look at traditional bases. So the traditional basis for jurisdiction, you're looking at consent, which can be given like previously in a contract with a forum selection clause, or if you have waived your right to object, basically like you did not object in time, then you have essentially consented to that jurisdiction. So you want to waive right away and not answer the complaint first and then waive it. You want to object right away. And then the next one is presence or like tag jurisdiction. So that only pertains to a person, not a corporation and a person. So if that person is voluntarily in the forum state and you serve them there, then the court has personal jurisdiction over that individual. Domicile, if that person lives and they reside there and they intend to reside there, then they are domiciled there. A person can only have one domicile at a time, so you want to keep that in mind. So there might be something in the facts in which you'd have to determine which location is the domicile for that person. Perhaps they left on a trip for 6 months, but they are intending to go back to their house that they own. They would be domiciled in that home, right? Not in the place that they were going on a 6-month journey to. Or if it's a corporation, then you would want to look to see where it was incorporated or where the principal place of business is. So now, after you have determined whether or not there's a traditional basis for personal jurisdiction, then likely if it's an SA, the traditional basis won't apply because that would end up in a really short essay. It might apply in the MBEs though. So if the traditional basis, if none of that, you would conclude whether or not there's personal jurisdiction based on the traditional basis. If not, then you're going to be looking at the minimum contacts that defendant has, right? So you want to look to see if there were minimum contacts that were sufficient to not offend the traditional notions of fair play and substantial justice. Again, we're looking at the constitutional aspect of this, right? Is this fair? General jurisdiction, that's the first kind of subheading under the minimum contacts. You would be looking for general jurisdiction. That would mean that the courts would have jurisdiction to be able to hear all kinds of different claims. Then you would look to see that the defendant's contacts with the forum state were so much so that it's as if they were essentially at home, right? So then you would, it's pretty much a C supra for the traditional bases. And then you would then conclude if there was general jurisdiction. Likely again in an essay, you would probably conclude no, and then continue with specific jurisdiction. Specific jurisdiction, you're looking at the defendant's suit-related conduct as being a substantial connection with the forum state. So you're only looking at what their conduct was as it relates to the suit. Okay. So you're going to be looking at two separate main things. You're going to be looking to see if they purposely availed themselves to the state and if it's reasonable for them to be hailed into court in that location. So purposeful availment, you're going to be looking at the contacts that they had with the forum state to see if it was reasonably foreseeable for the defendant to be hailed into court in the forum state. You'll be looking at subcategories to determine what minimum contacts are actually applicable here. And there could be multiple of these subcategories that apply to your situation, and you probably want to look at arguing both sides here. So first you're going to look at the suit-related conduct to see if there's a substantial connection with the defendant's directed activities specifically at the forum state and not just at the U.S. as a whole. You want to make sure that they're directed right at that forum state. Calder effects, that's for intentional torts. If somebody had did an intentional tort in the forum state, it is reasonable that they could foresee that they could be hailed into court there. So if you went and punched somebody in the face in a bar that you were visiting in the forum state, then it's reasonable that you would be hailed into court there. Contracts, you would be looking at where the contract was negotiated, where it was executed, and where it was performed. And those might be in 3 different places, and they might be done over the internet. So there's a lot to talk about there. Stream of commerce. There isn't clear guidance on this. There's 2 different ways of looking at it. If you put something in the stream of commerce under Brennan, then you're just simply need to be aware that your product was going to be in the stream of commerce in that forum state. Under O'Connor, you would have to have awareness plus something else, perhaps marketing or manufacturing, something else in that forum state. In REM, that is, you're looking at property, and if the property is subject to the claim, then you would want to make sure that that property is related to the action. Okay, so it's not just that person owns property in Nevada, so therefore I can file suit there, right, and have personal jurisdiction there. It has to actually be related to the claim. And the last little category is the internet. So the internet, World Wide Web, it's going out to everywhere. So you would want to look to see that the activity on the internet was directed specifically at that forum state and not just out in general. Then you would conclude to see if they purposely availed themselves. Next, you would want to look at reasonableness. Even if you concluded that they did not purposefully avail themselves, I would still go ahead and talk about the reasonableness part of specific jurisdiction. So those are determined under the Asahi factors. Oh, and for sure you would want to talk about it if you concluded that there was specific jurisdiction. You want to then decide if it was reasonable it was fair, right? If it's fair to have the claim heard in that jurisdiction. The Asahi factors, you're looking at the burden that it puts on the defendant to go to court there. You're looking at number 2, the forum state's interest. Is it to do with a state law? Is it to do with protecting their people that live in that state? You're going to look at the third one is the plaintiff's interest in obtaining convenient and effective relief. So they might be ill or something and it's very hard for them to travel or something like that. Nowadays, a lot of things are done over video, so I don't know if that's, plays into factors. I'm sure it probably does. And then the fourth one is efficiency and resolution. So that you would look at, like, where are the witnesses, where are the expert witnesses, where's the main source of information here, and how efficient is it going to be to resolve it in this court. And then the fifth one is if there's any shared interest of states. So perhaps there are other interests, other states that are involved, other states' laws that are involved. So you would look at that to see if the other states had a shared interest. Again, you would analyze all 5 of those separately, and then you would decide. You don't have to hit all 5 of them. All 5 of them, as far as, like, you don't have to say, okay, well, because, only 1 or 2 were applicable, then it's not reasonable. You just look at the minimum and decide on your own. So then you would conclude as if it was reasonable, and then we have made it to the end of our personal jurisdiction and analysis, and we're going to conclude whether or not the court has personal jurisdiction over the parties involved in the claim. So there you have it. Happy studies!